Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers is a weekly program designed to answer all your questions, including the ones you didn't even know you had, and to clarify the endless debates around the wonderful and fascinating world of sexuality. Join us for real talk about sex from two experts in the field. Richard and Larry Siegel have over 50 years of experience as sex therapists, educators, counselors, and researchers. The Siegel Brothers are recognized around the world as trainers of medical and mental health professionals.
Hello and welcome to Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. I'm Dr. Ricky Siegel, a certified sex therapist.
And I'm Larry Siegel, a clinical sexologist and certified sexuality educator.
And my awesome big brother.
My favorite role.
Cheers to you.
Cheers to you.
And to you. Thank you for joining us this week. Is this another of your homemade concoctions?
Yes, it is.
Larry's become a sake mixologist.
It's an infuser, as it were.
So what are we drinking? This is delicious.
This is still the kind of some of the Asian pear sake that we've had, but I did kind of infuse this with a sweet lemonade.
Oh, wow!
I thought that would be an interesting mix, and it does work.
It's tasty. So we are here for our weekly discussion on all things about sex. Right?
Indeed. Sex and sexuality.
Right. And there's a lot of reason to be hopeful that the future will be brighter.
Yes.
Last 4 years have not been good in terms of sexual health policy in this country.
No, it has not.
So the bar is low. Lots of room for improvement.
Right. And as we mentioned last week as well, and as many of you know, hopefully that tide is starting to turn. We've at least got a slate of executive orders that are starting to reverse some of these sort of anti-sex, anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ ... type of policies that were put in place by the monkey in chief that we had in the last 4 years. So hopefully we are starting to come out of this.
Yep.
Still going to keep my fingers crossed. Because we changed the driver doesn't mean the vehicle is that much different yet.
Well, it's like the big ship, it takes a lot of energy to move it, but move it indeed we can.
Yes. So again, I will drink to the hope of one day being a more sex positive nation.
Yeah. It would be nice if politics started to catch up a little bit more to what most people believe, right?
Yeah.
It's been a long time that Americans have been, even uptight Americans, as we like to complain a lot about all of our squirrely relationships with sexuality. But Americans have long been hipper than our elected leaders when it comes to most things. Even, we talk about pro-choice Catholics, or attitudes about divorce or marriage equity. I mean, most American people, and I think I would like to hope that while it's been razor thin, these victories, even this new president and vice president. Yes, it's exciting and it's great and everybody's happy, but remember the 70 million people that did not vote for them. And the 1% that Alabama didn't send a perv judge to the Senate a couple of years ago. Yep. So, it's turning that big, huge ship, hopefully, in the right course.
Yeah, and again, we will see. And, you talk about all of these razor-thin majorities that have been established that, we can certainly call victories, but, we have to be very, very clear. This election, again, a victory, yes. A mandate, no, because it's too close. It's too tight. It's nice to see we've crossed over that line. But if we really want to make some changes, and I'm going to speak directly to you millennials and Gen Zs out there, because, you really need to be leading a lot of this charge. As cliche as it is, this is our future. And all of these things can really be addressed, as cliche as it is and as trite as it may sound, by voting. If you get out there and vote and actually help elect legislatures, policymakers, leaders that are going to truly represent you. You kind of were just started making this point, and just to sort of reframe it, we have all of these representatives that don't seem to be representing the majority of Americans.
No, they're representing who bought their seat and paid their way, and
Right.
as soon as they get into office, they're in a panic to try and stay in office.
That's
so
right.
all they do is work on their re-election campaign
Absolutely.
from day one.
That's one of the most messed up parts of our election system, that it's all constant campaigning. It's all about money.
Part of how this orangutan was able to take over the party is that they were also chicken shit, worrying about their keeping their offices.
Right.
That if they disagree or get tweeted at,
That's
they'll get primaried out of
Right.
office.
So, give them something to really be afraid of. Make that a real fear.
real
Make your
mandate.
vote something that they have to pay attention to.
Yeah.
Right? Being critical and being cynical and just complaining about everything is not being woke. Right? Having an attitude is not enough. You got to back that up with action.
I so love that Barack Obama said that. That was, people need to hear that. Yeah, it's not just grandstanding, especially now. Politics needs involvement.
Right.
So, it kind of, we can segue it around to what I was thinking in inviting our guest tonight. That, we bitch a lot, complain a lot, that we've been in this field for decades, and sometimes we pine about what hasn't changed, and same old thing, and we're so frustrated. And because it's a small field, and we have the luxury and pleasure of knowing a lot of folks, and we've had some real pioneers in the field on this show, and even I hate to say it, but our approaching, well, for you more than 30 years is about half the age of the field itself, right?
Good night.
But it's a brand new baby field.
Yeah.
Right? If I said you were in it as half the field of psychology, you'd be really old. But sexology is not that old. But I just thought it would be nice to have, for a change, to have a conversation with some new blood.
Yeah.
Again, because we've been around, we've been teaching for a long time. We've been teaching here in South Florida for a long time. We've had these humbling moments, these reminders of the passage of time, like when a former student of yours turned out to be your dentist. My cardiology PA, Jess, if you're listening, was a former student. One of my daughter's teachers was a former student.
Of both of ours.
Right. So I invited Leslie Worth, who is a wonderful sex therapist and a recent graduate of Modern Sex Therapy Institutes. And when you spend 50 hours doing supervision with someone, you really get a sense of the kind of therapist they are. And with Leslie, I just knew right out of the gate, she was one of those who had it.
Yeah.
So we wanted to talk about what it's like to become a sex therapist now in the new millennium. And we should
let's just go right to it.
We had a good time talking. Let's share it with our
Indeed.
viewers. And we are back and very happy to be joined by Leslie Worth, relatively new sex therapist, but brilliant, as I said before, and hit the ground running in Orlando, Florida.
Yep.
Right.
Interesting place to be doing sex therapy.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Really happy to have you join us. And as we discussed in our back and forth, it's kind of a change of pace for us to talk to a rising star We
Well, thank
often,
you for that.
well, we complain that it's too small a field, that
Mhm.
there's not enough sex therapists. But the best benefit is we kind of almost know everybody and have the benefit of being able to invite some of the like people we've studied and real giants and some occasional dinosaurs,
Mhm.
right?
Well, careful, we're in that category now.
Yeah.
Once you pass the 30-year mark, you're now in the dinosaur category.
But we spent a lot of time in supervision together, and I know what an awesome therapist you are, and it's always a thrill to watch how therapists kind of weave in and integrate sex therapy into the work they're already doing.
Mhm.
And since we are kind of borderline dinosaurs,
Thanks to the caveat.
start
There you go.
thinking, as you said before, start thinking about legacy and getting those
Mhm.
reminders, like when our students are all grown up and professionals on their own.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
So that kind of look forward, and I guess the first place would be to ask you to indulge me and blow some smoke up my skirt and tell me how wonderful and awesome it was training at Modern Sex Therapy Institute.
It was a really amazing opportunity, and I really appreciated Ricky and I had a lot of one-on-one supervision, so I had a lot of your undivided attention and supervision, which was very helpful. And then I was actually happy I kind of slowed down my supervision for a while, because that's when I opened my private practice, and then I actually got hit with some clients. So it was really nice to have the dinosaur to get some expert advice from, especially those first couple clients, because it's one of those you don't quite trust yourself completely of knowing what to do or how to guide clients, and especially this round, because they're just so nervous. And then I feel as a new clinician, you're nervous as well.
Right, but who was your very first sex case?
Ever?
Yeah.
So it was
What kind of nudged you toward this path in the first place?
Right. So when I was studying at UCF for graduate program and practicum, one of my very first clients ever had the bug in my ear with my supervisor, and it was trans client, female to male, who was exploring BDSM, and it was very interesting, and I loved it, and I got a lot of direction and feedback from supervisors that this is a pathway that I really should seek out after graduation.
And why exactly?
Because she said I didn't flinch when my client started to address some of these issues, and I didn't see it as a big deal. I come from the theater world, so I feel like I was exposed to a lot when you grow up in entertainment. But then I looked around to my other cohort classmates, and there was a lot of deer in headlight looks, and I was like, oh, I get it. Okay.
Yeah. And that's not something to gloss over. That's a really big part of what makes a good sex therapist. There are even people that have been doing this for a long time that they still seem to have very thin skin. So the fact that kind of right out of the gate, you were okay with this, I think says a lot about what potential is there.
Right. And I hear that from clients too, of they've gone to other couples therapists or individual therapists, and they don't want, like, as soon as sex comes up, they kind of get skirted out the door. And I'm really surprised. And this is something that Ricky and I always talked about too, of especially family and couples therapists. I'm like, how do you get to the family part?
Right.
Unless everyone's adopting.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Or conceiving immaculately.
Right.
Just picking up one morning with the child.
Yeah.
And speaking of that, you're also a new sex therapist in kind of an unusual part of the country. Well, a fellow Floridian, but not the same state we live in. Way down here,
Right.
in New York. We live in New York with palm trees.
Yes.
I think a lot of the field tends to get a little, the view is narrow because you kind of go around the country, right? New York and Atlanta and South Florida and Southern California, Northern California, even in Florida, we can go around from West Palm to Fort Lauderdale, Miami, and then scoot past Sarasota and Naples to St. Pete and Tampa, where it's all nice and blue. When I moved down here in when '89, Florida was a blue state. and between the growing Cuban influence from down south and the the rest of the we're in the deep south part of Florida,
Right. And the Midwest
kind of
influence.
made this purple thing
Yeah.
start to happen, and well, sometimes even a blue state.
Mm-hmm.
And you're right there in the middle.
Right.
As you said, you live in Kissimmee and work in Orlando. So and that, I'm sure, is like crossing a line, right?
Right. And I have family that lives in Lake County, so it's a wide gamut of type of influence.
That Central Florida core going on.
What do
there.
they think of being a sex therapist?
I think it depends on who you talk to. My parents get it, my sister get it, my grandmother just knows I'm a therapist, and even that they don't quite understand why would someone come talk to me about their problems. But they all joke that at least my family experience I can probably pull from and relate to the crazies, as they put it. And I'm like, every family has their stories. But it is a very interesting place to be, because I remember when the map came up for during the election, we always joked that the blue, it looked like lakes, right? In Florida, it was all red and there was like these pockets of blue. And that's definitely where Orlando is. And then even Osceola County, with the rise of Puerto Rican culture and population coming up here after the hurricane and the traumatic experiences they've been through. And then we have that, and then we have St. Cloud, which is cattle farmers. So it's a very split type of dynamic. And you have pockets that are very accepting for everything, and then there's definitely pockets that aren't accepting of everything.
And I would think in that area, among the largest employers are some very gay-friendly corporations, like the theme park companies. And so, do you see, obviously this is like one of the crazy things about this crazy work. It's like this delusion that conservative people don't have sex or sexual.
Right.
So are there kind of red couple presentations and blue couple presentations that you notice?
Absolutely. I think just this past Monday, my one of my morning clients was very conservative, heterosexual couple running in through some infidelity issues, and then later that afternoon it was a lesbian married couple having their own issues. So within one day, I saw both sides of the coin.
So I'm curious, again, being where you are, I imagine you will see what we've kind of been hearing about for years. Remember, several years ago, there was kind of like this study that was done looking at sexual behavior correlated with political orientation. And, the sort of quick and easy synopsis is, sort of blue people or people more on the political left are more frequent sex that they have. People, or the red people, the conservative people, are more freaky.
Okay.
Freaky. Right. So the blue people tend to have sex more often, but red people tend to have freakier sex.
I remember
they tend to be a little bit more out there sometimes. I don't know if you see any of that.
A little, and a lot of the stuff I've been seeing recently, especially with LGBT community, is how purity culture, especially for females, is influencing their adult sexual identity, and how they're still trying to separate that they don't ascribe to the purity culture anymore, but it's still so rooted in their brain that they're still having trouble breaking from it.
Nice. Now, I wonder, again, just what you're saying, and we talked about this before, so I think this might be a good time for me to try to understand it a little bit better, given what you just described. You also are a practitioner of what is called acceptance and commitment therapy.
Right.
And then I'm wondering how that might kind of work into what you just described.
Sure. So with ACT, it's kind of separating that accepting and condoning don't have to be the same thing, right? So I can accept something, but that doesn't mean I have to like it. So it's one of those with this population, especially these clients, it's getting to the point of accepting that they grew up in this culture. Doesn't mean they have to like it or ascribe to it, and doesn't mean it's part of their identity. And also sometimes they feel torn because they still like some aspects of it, So it's kind of like breaking that black and white thinking of like, you can take the good and leave the rest. I think of like the Come As You Are book, like the garden, right? Like people plant stuff in your garden and you're allowed to rearrange it however you want as you get older. The example I give all the time, and it really relates in Orlando. I don't know if you guys hear about I-4 down there, but I-4 is the worst road in Florida, maybe the nation. I'm not sure.
It's a road, but it was a parking lot that was always
right. So my joke with clients is always like, after my last client of the day leaving at 6, I can accept traffic's going to suck. Doesn't mean I like it. Right. And then how does that change our expectations and our emotional reactions to things when we can accept things that we don't necessarily like?
Wow. See, you're familiar with that. I know that, but I really haven't been. And what you just told me is that they finally put a name and created this whole thing around what I've been saying for 30 years.
Yes.
This idea, and I've always been working with people on this idea that in order to accept something, you don't have to like it, you don't have to agree with it, and you don't have to understand it. Right. Accepting to me is simply acknowledging the reality of what is, as opposed to what we wish it were, what we would rather it be, what we think it's supposed to be, and then working from there, because that's the only place you can really start from, that acceptance.
Yeah. Like,
and the second, oh, sorry, Ricky.
Don't the Marines say, embrace the suck?
Yeah.
You know, it sucks. So you can be upset about it, or it's still going to suck, or if you accept it.
Right.
Sure.
Nice.
So, it is a good existential therapy.
Right. And that second part, the commitment part, right? How does that work into the acceptance?
So it's the second part of it act is it's really mindfulness based. So it's a lot of de-escalation, especially for anxiety, in the moment type stuff. And it's really that part of like the commitment of, you can't just say you accept it. You kind of have to follow through with your behaviors and actions and show that you're actually committed, because it's really easy for me to say, yeah, I accept that my mother-in-law drives me crazy. But if I am emotionally responding every single time I'm around her, that's not the commitment piece to that acceptance.
Nice. Again, that little rhetoric versus reality.
Yeah. Yeah. But nice. I can't help have that feeling sometimes with so many therapies that rose by another name kind of thing, like EFT. It's an awful lot of familiar concepts. Ultimately, you know, they're either CBT or some form thereof, combinations of existential and humanistic kinds of therapies. Of course, the trauma work has been growing importance in the sex world, because people like me who don't have a background in trauma work realized over the years that there's only so far I can get, where this thing comes slamming down in the way. And then the brilliant trauma folks I know just kind of like pave that way so sex therapy can happen.
Right.
Or the real kind of old school psychoanalysis, which that's a dinosaur.
Right.
Nobody's laying on the couch anymore complaining about getting taken off the breast too soon and 5 years on the couch so they can get insight. I don't know who's doing therapy except rich neurotics in New York and LA.
Right. Who don't need insurance to cover it.
Right.
$350 an hour, 3-4 times a week for 4 or 5 years.
Right.
Oh, can you imagine? I don't want to take any patients like that.
No. Right. So again, as a young therapist, right, and you come in with, I think I'm going to say advantage of starting out on these paved roads, as you just kind of described. What's it like for you coming into this field? What's your view? What's your perception of the work?
Sure. I feel like the young therapists, new therapists, we have a lot more tools to pull from. So I remember in grad school, they always say, you can't say you're eclectic, but I feel like most young therapists are eclectic just because that's the generation we grew up in, right? We grew up in the Google generation of like, if we didn't have the answer, that didn't stop us from figuring it out. So I think that translates into how even my practice of like, I'm not going to just say, oh, I don't have that set of skills to help you. I may not be well versed in it, but I pull techniques from various theories to help each client individually. And I think that's also the mindset too of we're very individual focused on that client, not trying to prescribe like a boxed type therapy to the masses.
Mm-hmm. If your only tool is a hammer, everything starts to look like a nail.
Right.
Yes.
Yeah.
Good. So what's your favorite part of being a sex therapist? What do you love to see? What kind of cases do you really get jazzed about?
The more complex ones. So I always tell my clients that I view it as investigator collecting puzzle pieces, and we're going to see how the puzzle pieces fit together. And the cases I really like are the ones that I have to kind of break through, and they want to come to and just like, well, it's just premature ejaculation. I'm like, no, I don't think so. There's probably more to this story. And then those are the most, I think, satisfying clients, because you can see those like aha moments as you're slowly like chipping at their shell, and then they're starting to realize it's a bigger picture. And I think they usually find more hope in that, of they can address the other underlying roots to the problem, and it's not just this performance piece that they're lacking.
Right.
And I think that's kind of a distinction that I see between, people, more like you, younger, newer therapists that are coming into the field, compared to people that have come from way back, that there is sort of a different focus almost. There's a different way of looking at it. I think traditional sex therapy has always been very performance based, and I think you've used the kind of framing of sort of looking backward, looking back in people's lives and trying to find where those pieces were. But as a newer therapist, I think your focus is more a little forward, and it's not so much about performance as it is about process. Would that be correct?
Sure. Yeah. And it's looking, I say, like, we don't exist in compartments, you may say that your stressing out at work has nothing to do with your performance in the bedroom. And I tend to challenge that. I don't think anxieties, stay in these tiny little boxes in our lives, and they're all influenced to one another. And then also just from continuing exploring, like I loved The Erotic Mind, the book, and how it's, reiterates like our childhood haunts us a lot longer than we like to admit to. And, it's looking at those pieces, and even like the emotional bonding with parents. And I think that's where, like, coming from a marriage and family, like I love doing genograms. Right. And I find that to be helpful too, even with this, of like, what was the emotional attachment like with your parent figures, because those are the first parent or the figures that we emotionally bond to. And if those have been damaged and now you're wondering why you're having trust in your marriage, I'm like, there's probably a link there that needs to be explored.
If any of our viewers aren't familiar with the genogram, it's like a genealogy picture, like family tree. We can really look at where we came from, but with more of an eye toward where we've inherited our baggage.
Yes.
More about the dynamics
Repeat
than just
patterns,
family structure.
Intergenerational trauma,
Right.
teaching what we've learned, even if it was dysfunctional and not in our best interests. All the usual things I think about the business.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, especially with couples when because they both come from different family of origins, and they don't on a conscious level realize that they learned what a husband and wife was based on what they were modeled, and these are conversations I think every couple should have, but they don't. Like, what is a husband, what is a wife, or what is a partner, what is a mother, what is a father, because we just base it on our own experience and kind of forget that our experience isn't everyone's experience.
Nice.
Yeah, that's something we've talked about, quite a bit, especially over the years, and even several times on the show. How, so many people go into their relationships, they start their relationships with expectations and assumptions, but very little agreements, very little conversation, very little of defining their terms.
Right. Yeah. And then the added piece of sexual experiences too. I've been seeing that a lot too with same-sex partners. One client comes to mind. It said it took her a lot of years to kind of break that stereotypical one has to be the man and one has to be the woman, right? And because that's what she grew up with, and she tried to ascribe that to her relationships, and it caused some issues. And it took her a while to kind of break out of that. Of you don't have to have those roles.
Mm-hmm.
Mm-hmm. Excellent.
Now, are you seeing that kind of stuff even in younger couples, or is that more older?
Yeah, they're still younger. Some of that client's in her like early 30s. And I've seen it in younger clients too, as young as like 21, and they're still with those prescribed kind of like set roles. And even in heterosexual couples too, of all of a sudden, I love when I work with a heterosexual couple, and as soon as I suggest bringing toys in and the guy like stiffens up, I'm like, this is nothing against your manhood. Okay. This is, let's get over that. So there's still these rigid stereotypical roles that are still being portrayed in media.
Mm-hmm. And I think in most of our institutions, and I think that's a really important piece of information for a lot of people, that especially millennials, Gen Zers, people that are supposed to be so hip and so woke, yet they're still operating under the same old scripts.
Right. And I think a lot of it's because even though we're in 2021, sex is still somewhat taboo to talk about in that sense of as opposed to just like, tab A, slot B kind of thing, very medical terminology. And I think what I've seen is when people have experimented more, they get more comfortable, but those first couple of experiences are still very in those stereotypical roles, and people should follow these prescriptions to how it should play out.
Yeah.
So, from all the hours we spent together, that one of my biggest pet peeves, marriage and family therapists who don't talk about sex,
Right.
how to get to the marriage, how to get to the family part.
Mm-hmm.
So I guess as a parting shot, if you were to be asked to go into a graduate marriage and family therapy program, a bunch of new MFT students, what would you tell them about sex therapy and talking about sex in their work?
That if they're not comfortable for it, then maybe they should look for a new line of work, because it's not just sex therapists that are presented with these issues. Like you said, how do you get to the family part without it? Or even just family, like even if they have children and they're still trying to help their children develop, it's something that just needs to be part of the conversation. And I would tell them to do a lot of their own, kind of like what we did during the sex therapy training, a lot of your own development and kind of looking at what do I feel about this? How do I view this? Do I have any bias, or preconceived notions about these type of things? That would be probably my advice to them.
That's very nice.
Well, thanks for taking the time to come and talk with us on Sex Talk.
Really appreciate it. It's a pleasure to meet you. Right?
It was great meeting you. Yeah, absolutely.
Of knowing you already, but this is our first time meeting, and
yes.
What a delight. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for having me.
Pleasure.
Right. It's nice to hear a fresher perspective, for lack of a better phrase. Yeah. And one of the things that I so appreciate in part of her style, like we were saying at the very top of the show, back up what you say. Yeah. It's one thing to say you want something. It's one thing you say you believe in something, but it's another thing to follow that with some kind of action. So, I was very appreciative hearing the way she described this, sort of acceptance and commitment therapy, and just putting it very succinctly and in a way that's so manageable and so easy, and kind of sort of like,
Right.
No shit kind of thing.
No, but that's one of the many things I love about sex therapy. It's like the old saying, all roads lead to Rome. There are so many ways into sex therapy.
Yeah.
And some folks do take this kind of, this approach,
Mm-hmm.
you know, as we said during our chat with Leslie. It's kind of a cognitive behavioral therapy, but also a lot of narrative and existential and you know, anything that gets people involved in their story and willing to make a commitment to rewrite it.
Mm-hmm.
Right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
I mean, sometimes the basic things that happen in therapy are so basic and so simple. It's embarrassing, like I'm giving away like a magician giving away how a trick is done. We're just facilitating change.
Right.
Right? And maybe sometimes people need some help finding the motivation to make a change, but it's an easy question to ask. Why would anybody be miserable? Why would anyone choose to stay miserable? But it's not always an easy question to answer.
No, it really isn't, except that it's, you know, people get more comfortable.
Yeah.
You know, and, you know, we like to do what we know, even if it doesn't feel very good. The fact that it's familiar kind of keeps us in it sometimes.
Yeah.
So, you know, having this sort of new approach, if you will, although not really a new approach, but, you know, seeing new people approach it the way they do, I think it kind of gives new drivers on those wheels. And, you know, you use the analogy of sort of paving a road. And, you know, I kind of do, like I said in our conversation, I like the fact that, you know, all of these new and younger therapists are able to come in and just start driving on this road that's already been paved, but they're driving in ways that we may not have thought of before in, you know, those people who have paved these roads.
Right.
Right? And that's something that I find really exciting. Right? To see that there's so many, it's sort of like you look out on the road now, how many different cars are there? How many different kinds of drivers are there on the road? And when we look at professionals, we see a similar kind of thing. And I find it gratifying.
Good.
Hopeful.
Yeah.
Right? I'm hopeful.
Yeah.
Right? So I think that's probably a good place for us to end for tonight. Mm-hmm. I hope you enjoyed the conversation as much as we enjoyed having it.
Thank you for joining us, and of course are ever grateful for the likes on Facebook, and if you would subscribe to our YouTube channel and help us grow this thing.
Indeed. And in addition to following and subscribing, if you can also comment, right?
Sure.
Leave some comments on our YouTube channel
Yes.
as well. We'd love to hear from you, as well as on Facebook, but you know, we would love to be interactive with you as well.
So we'll be here next week and every week at 7 p.m. East Coast time for more Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers.
Indeed. Thanks for watching and stay safe.
Thanks for watching Sex Talk with the Siegel Brothers. Join us each week on Friday at 7 p.m. Eastern. You can also follow us on Facebook and subscribe to our YouTube channel to stay on top of the latest developments in the ever-changing world of sex and sexuality.